Hi guys, thank you for joining me for Walking with the Word. I've got a cute little stowaway on the back here. Have a look at this little stowaway. Say hiya. He's come along for the ride. I heard people asking, why did God send a pandemic? If God's real, why would he send a pandemic? A pandemic that comes with so much suffering, so much chaos, so much disruption. And I want to break this down and explore the question. Now, the question suggests that God sent the pandemic, like God has this idea about something that needs to happen in the world, and his best way to achieve it is to send a pandemic along. God is the cause of the pandemic. And you might think that makes sense because Christians believe that God is in control, that he's powerful, he's all-powerful. They believe that God governs the world down to the tiniest details. You might think it makes sense to say, why would God send the pandemic? But I actually don't think that's necessarily the case. Even if God is absolutely sovereign over the world down to the smallest details, it may well be that God's sovereignty is exercised through not just sending or causing things to happen, but through allowing or permitting certain things to happen. So for example, imagine a pandemic were caused by someone mishandling some biochemical hazardous substances in the lab in China. That's one of the theories of how it came about. So it's basically humans being a little bit careless with these samples. That wouldn't be God sending a pandemic. God would bring a world into being knowing that something like this is going to happen. But it's not necessarily the case that God caused it or sent it. It could just be something that God knows would happen in a particular situation, and he brings a world into being and he knows that's going to happen, but he does it allowing it to happen. It's not something that God's caused, it's not an act of punishment or an act of judgment. But the question really is God working in the midst of the pandemic? Does God work through these situations of horrible suffering, through this situation of chaos, disruption, pandemic? Can God work through that? And I think the answer to that second question is yes, absolutely. God does work through these types of things. I actually think that God permits or allows suffering and evil in the world because God has goals and plans for people which sometimes sadly can only come about through a certain amount of suffering being in the world. Now when people are talking about suffering, it can come from one of two positions. We can either come from the position of emotionally struggling with suffering, saying like, I've got this personal suffering in my life and it just hurts, and I struggle with the idea of God allowing something like that, a supposedly loving God. And if you're going through this process of kind of emotional pain and struggle when you're actually thinking about suffering maybe in your own life, I'd encourage you to spend some time talking to someone who believes in God, someone who can pray with you, someone who can counsel and support you through the suffering. But on the other hand, if you feel that the suffering in the world is an argument against God, I think you need to consider the following idea. We're in no position to say that God does not or cannot have a morally sufficient reason for permitting the evil and suffering in the world. God could well have reasons. And for me personally, if I had to go through a certain amount of suffering in order to have a deeper relationship with God, or even to have a relationship with God in the first place, I know I would much rather do that. Why would I personally bear with suffering in order to have a relationship with God? Because I know a relationship with God is the single most valuable thing a human being can have in their life. It is the most valuable thing. So it may be that you don't agree with that, maybe you're not in that place yourself, but the Bible puts it this way. It says that God has placed everyone in their circumstances and situations. Everyone has been put in the place that they're in order that they might reach out for him and grasp for him and find him, though he's not far from any of us. And that includes, sadly, situations where we do sometimes experience suffering. It includes situations where we do go through pain and we do go through hurt. But we have this assurance that God stands with us. He cares. His hand's on us. He loves us. We're not outside of his providential plans. We've not fallen away from his hand. He cares for us in the midst of our suffering, in the midst of our pain. He wants to know us more deeply. He wants to walk with us. And he wants us to walk through walk through our pain with him because he can support us. God's answer to suffering in this world is his Son. Jesus stood with his hands open the scars on his back, the scars on the palms of his hand, testifying that he loves us and cares about us. So if you're going through pain and suffering today, my heart is with you, my prayers are with you, and just know that you have a God who cares, a God who empathizes, and a God who wants to know you more deeply, that you would build dependence and love and trust in him through the walk, through the pain. Okay, this little one is starting to get a little bit upset now, so we're going to go, and we'll see you tomorrow. Can you say bye-bye? Bye-bye. And thank you for joining me today. God bless you. Take care and see you soon.